Really great. She is
Cool. All right. It looks like most of us are here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Rest of the folks can catch up. So, thank you for being hopefully you were mildly entertained by the video that I did. Was it mildly entertaining? Okay, cool. What did you like about it, Philip?
You did a good job of using like outside sources, explaining and making it more of a simple concept and made it easier to understand.
Okay, so it's pretty easy to understand. Outside sources, different concepts, that kind of stuff. So cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. So the concept of implicit bias. What do you think about that concept? Yes.
I'm gonna be honest, when it was the Harvard test at the end and they were describing everything,
Yep.
and then it said basically like this you have this implicit bias and so far there's nothing to be done about it. It's kind of just so you know. But I was kind of like, so what do you do now with that? You know, it's like okay, you have this, you don't have this, you know, whatever. But it was kind of just like, yeah, and there it is.
Yep.
I don't know, that was unsettling.
It's very unsettling, right? I would think so. It's very unsettling, which is why I have an answer for that. Which is why I think I started talking about that earlier. That I can appreciate the effort and the stuff that's gone into that, but I think it's an imperfect tool for the reason you just pointed out, right? So what do you do with that, right? What do you do with it? Other folks, what did you think about that implicit association test, or did you like your results? Did you not like your results? Were they how you thought they would be? Were they different than how you thought they would be? Go ahead, Joe.
My results, I'll just share what I had. It said I was moderately leaning towards white over black. And how I saw it, how I grew up, and how the majority of my friends were African American, and like people do. And seeing that, I was like, it just, I couldn't. It was hard to make that connect. It felt like a disconnect, but this test told me that. I don't know, it was just confusing to me.
It was a bit confusing because your inclination, because of where you were raised, you would think that you would be one way when, in fact, the assessment said you were something else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Other folks, yeah.
I was kind of frustrated with mine because it's pretty strong on that preference for white people over black people, and I don't know, it feels in a sense, but it makes sense because I grew up in like a 95% white community. You know, to be honest, that is not all that diverse either, so maybe it makes sense, but that's not how I thought of myself before.
Okay, so it's not how you thought of yourself before, and that created some frustration for you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yes. I saw a hand up here as well.
I've taken the test multiple times. I just don't think there should be like a lot of the weight put into the results of the test because, so like I didn't have a preference as my result. But I felt like the test was like, all right, let's push towards the place where we don't have any more implicit bias, and I don't think that's like a possibility. Like you stated, it's natural and don't overcome it to be more aware about them. But I think that's something that I'll figure out in taking that test. Not shooting the perfect score in the
Possible, right? Yeah. Should we have a perfect score? Is there blah, blah, blah? And I want to go back to what Trevor was talking about, and what you're talking about as well, is that there's an idea of who we think we are, and then there is something that is telling us that we're not who we think we are, right? And then what is that? How does it? And just to think about that cognitive dissonance, right? And more importantly, it's not necessarily just having that pointed out to us, but also what do we do with that, right? What were your thoughts?
I'm thinking about what your video said about the and the meaningful
Yeah.
frame. And like if it's can have a bias, if that really still matters, or maybe it doesn't matter as much because that's not our executive function, or like somewhere in the middle of that. So I'd like to learn what that means for the league, that other stuff about it.
Yeah. So this is what we know about. All right, and again, I tried to talk about this kind of brain function in the video as succinctly as I can. But what we know for sure is that there are automatic responses that we have, right? So if I throw something, and I'm not going to do it, Philip, but if I threw something at Philip, what's Philip's first response before he even thinks about anything else? Yes. Yeah. He's gonna put his stuff up, right? Whether he's critically thinking about that or not. Which is why, particularly a number of you are athletes, right? You train to have certain kinds of physical, automatic responses to things that can happen in your sport. Baseball players, hockey players, football players. Okay, right? So what other sports do folks play? Softball. Okay. So I could never play baseball because I couldn't get over the idea that somebody's trying to hit me with something. Like they're throwing it as fast as they can, up to 90 miles an hour, and it could actually hit me. There's something in my brain that says that doesn't sound like fun to me. You know? And I'm like, so it's just the whole weirdness of having somebody throwing something at you at 90 miles an hour just doesn't make sense to me, right? But for baseball players, they're ready, right? And then people are right. So just absolutely, but I can't. My brain can't get around that, right? Because of my natural response. So my natural response to something coming at me is to flinch. So if baseball players did that on a regular, could they be the professionals that we know? That could we marvel at them for? No. What have they done? They've been able to control that stuff, right? So I would submit that our primal brain is still operating, it's still doing that stuff. But what we try to do as human beings is control that brain. So I think the correlation is, where are there areas that we're so what is a habit? What is a habit? You guys have habits. I have a habit. Something you do every day. Do you think about it? No, you typically don't think about a habit, right? I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but have you ever driven home and gotten home and you're like, dang, I don't even remember what happened between. Why? Because you're an automatic pilot, right? You're not fully conscious of everything you're doing because you're running off of a pattern of routines, right? Well, I just gave away the next thing I was going to say. So how does one get a habit? You build a routine. And what is a routine? How is it different from a habit? You're aware of it. What else do you do with a routine? It's calculated. It's scheduled. It's timed, right? And you keep having it calculated, you keep scheduling it, you keep doing it until what? It becomes a habit. When I was around your age, probably a little younger, I was really silly. I was silly, right? Like now I'm so serious. I'm grown now. I'm serious. But I started. My best friend and I. There was a new place in town called Applebee's. Yeah, it was the hottest place in town, right? And so we would just flock there. Everybody was going to Applebee's. Right? It's Dayton, Ohio. It's small, small city and whatnot. And so, so he and I, we were probably sophomores, I would say, in college. Sophomores in college, maybe freshmen, sophomores. Maybe it was that summer. I think it was that summer between the two. But we started smoking tobacco pipes. Now, I don't know what you think about 18-year-olds now that you're not 18 any longer, but they look really young to me, right? And so I'm looking at 18-year-olds now, and I'm like, we must have looked so goofy, these 18-year-olds with these big old tobacco pipes, right? And so so it was my best friend, Dexter, and he had an older cousin who was 2 years older than us. So no, we must have been freshmen. who was a big fraternity guy on his campus, big man, big college guy, and he was cool to us. I mean, even at 18, you're still looking at people saying, who's cool and who's not. So we wanted to be like him, and he smoked a pipe. So we were like, cool, we're gonna be like him. We gotta smoke pipes too, right? So we had these tobacco pipes. Now we would meet at Applebee's on Wednesdays. Because I didn't work that day and I didn't have class or whatever, so we'd meet that night at Applebee's, and I would forget my pipe, and Dexter would be like, "Man, where's your pipe?" And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't think about it. I didn't remember." And so, and his cousin sometimes would come and he'd have his pipe and. He's and because we thought that was cool, huh? And so, but his cousin never forgot his pipe. As a result, what do you think happened to my pipe smoking today? I don't smoke my pipe. Why? Because it wasn't part of my routine, and it didn't become a part of my habits. Right? Didn't become a part of my habits. What about my friend's cousin? Guess what? Still smoking his pipe today because it's a part of his routine and it became a part of his habits, right? And so we have to recognize that those things are oftentimes connected, right? So what we consistently do and what we consistently don't do becomes a part of our habits. Right? So and can stimulate that mindset. And so I would submit to you that oftentimes we are looking for. Here's an example that kind of expresses this. So my sister has 5 kids. Her and her husband have 5 kids. 2 of them share a birthday to the day. So they're a year apart, but they were born a year apart to the day. And it is December 26th. That's a triple threat, all right? That's horribly bad for all 3. So not only do they share a birthday with each other, they share the birthday with Jesus, right? So so all their gifts are Christmas birthday presents, all wrapped up into one, and that's not cool, because as a kid you like to get presents kind of spread out throughout the year. I don't know about you, I thought like that. Okay. At any rate, so one of her sons has he's a stutterer. He stutters, and I found it very interesting that at a young age, at the age of 3, he understood that stuttering was a problem for him, but it wasn't something he could do anything about at 3. So right around 3 or 4, he started telling jokes. Now, I don't know if you've been around 3 or 4-year-olds, and if they have a sense of humor and they start telling jokes, but what's really cute or funny about their jokes? They don't make sense at all, but they think they're the most hilarious thing in the world, so you laugh with them, and so they continue to tell these bad jokes. Well, what my nephew discovered was if people were laughing with him, they weren't laughing at him. So he became the jokester, the prankster, the blah, blah, blah. And still his speech impediment continued. He is now 17. And it is not a common practice of mine. But if you can rattle him just a little bit, and guess what comes back? His stutter comes back. But if he's in control of the conversation, if he's in control of what we're talking about or how we're talking about, if he can make you laugh and he does stuff that's controversial and all sorts of stuff, he continues that conversation. No stutter. And so what that cued me into is something that a psychologist by the name of Alfred Adler talks about, which is that at the age of 3, we no longer learn. What he suggests is that by the age of 3, we just start collecting things that agree with who we think we are already. We just start collecting stuff that agrees with who we are. That is both a defense mechanism to the world. It is also understanding how the world works, but that also starts to create other illogical ways in which we see the world, ways that make sense to us, but actually might not have any sense in them, if that makes sense. I said sense like four times. Right? So we'll talk about that. And I think some of this racial consciousness stuff is problematic. So I believe that we have implicit bias. I believe that because of the context that we grew up in, there are things that we favor or things that we shun based on the context that we grew up with. But for me, what's more important than knowing I have an implicit bias is the follow-up question, which is what? What are you going to do about it? Right? What are you going to do about it? And so I think it's important that we have conversations about what we do about our implicit bias, more so than if we have them. Now, a game that I like to play sometimes, because sometimes I get feedback that I don't believe is necessarily accurate or true. However, I play this game for my own improvement. And the game is, what if it's true? Right? So what if it's true that even though I don't believe that I don't agree with that, but maybe it's true. So someone said once to me, I was in a presentation, and they said, "You're a misogynist." I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm not. I don't hate women, right? I don't have a hatred for women." But then I went to that place where I say I want to become better. So what if part of that is true? Then I have to look at my own life. I have to look at my own behavior. And once I'm able to be critical and looking at that behavior, I may find some areas where that might be true. Or I will be affirmed in saying, no, that's not true. And here are the reasons and the rationale why, right? So it's important for us to be a critical thinker. I believe that we all have implicit bias, that we operate with those because we come out of a context that teaches us to have this bias, right? However, the next step is, what do we do with that? And if I ignore it, just like if I had an illness and I ignored the illness, I'm not guaranteed that it'll get better if I ignore it, right? So I want to talk a little bit about some ways of thinking that we can start taking control over these things that people oftentimes say is out of our control. I can't, the boogeyman, it makes me do things, right? In the 70s, there was a show called The Flip Wilson Show, and he had an alter ego, kind of like Medea. You guys know Medea, right? So the dude that dresses up like a lady, right? So this dude dressed up like a lady too. And her name was Geraldine. And in the 70s, if you wanted to have a successful show, you had to have a catchphrase. Catchphrases is what made shows in the 70s and the early 80s, right? So maybe you know some of these catchphrases from the show. What you talking about, Willis? You know that catchphrase? Where's that show from? You know that show? Okay, so those catchphrases would be the equivalent probably of memes today, right? And so that was from Different Strokes. Another one, well, we don't have to go into the other one. So, but her catchphrase in this particular show was, "The devil made me do it," right? So she'd get into these zany situations, and they say, "Geraldine, why'd you do that?" And she would say, "The devil made me do," in that kind of classic sassy voice, right? And so how would that fly in your household? If your parents ask, why did you do something, or why didn't you do something? And your response was, "The devil made me do it." How would that? No, there'll be exorcism up in your house, wouldn't it? Right? Come out, splashing holy water on, all sorts of stuff, right? No, why? Why would that not be an acceptable way to respond to your parents?
That's not a valid excuse.
It's not a valid excuse, right? They'd be like, "Why'd you do that?" "Because Tommy told you." "Tommy doesn't even live in this house. Why are you doing what Tommy said?" Right? No, that's not a valid excuse. Implicit bias as an excuse for why we do things is not valid in my mind, right? I would say racism unchecked, just because my family's racist, blah blah blah, or we never talked about it, or blah blah blah. But that's not a valid excuse because now you're at the age of accountability for yourself, right? So let's talk about some of these things. So there are 4 effects of a faulty paradigm. The first is the illusion of knowledge. The illusion of knowledge. So before we even start talking about the concept of illusion of knowledge, when we look at the word illusion, what primary words can we draw out of this compound word illusion? What words can we even pull out of just looking at illusion? Ill. So first, ill meaning what? What does it mean to be ill? To be sick, right? And then what's another word that's in here? Illusion, as it refers to light, right? So when we talk about an illusion, we're talking about sick sight or sick light. So an illusion is sick light, if you will, right? If we break this word down. So when we talk about this idea of evolution of knowledge, what do you think we're going to start introducing? So maybe there are sick thoughts, but not in the way that you typically think about sick thoughts, right? But that this knowledge might not necessarily be what we think it is. We might not know what we think we know. Example, what I want you to do is I want you to draw a bicycle. Draw a bicycle. You've either ridden or you've seen a bicycle. So I want you to draw a bicycle to the best of your ability. All right, stop right there. I want you to share your bicycle with your neighbor at your table. Just share your bicycle. What does that look like at your... Are there commonalities? Are there differences? Will your bike even work? Right? Or did you take too long and you didn't even draw a complete bike yet? All right, cool. So let's talk about this illusion of knowledge. So we'll watch this video from Brain Games. Anyone ever seen Brain Games on National Geographic? So we'll watch this.
Take a look at the drawing on your screen. We've got a question for you. If this bus started driving forward, which direction would it move? Left or right? Not
Okay, so if you saw this bus, which direction do you think it would be moving? Left or right? If it were to start progressing. Left or right? How many people say left? How many people say right? You get a 50-50 shot, folks. Take a gamble, right? All right. So we left or right. So we'll see in just a second.
so obvious, isn't it? While you're struggling with this, would it surprise you to know that nearly 80% of children under the age of 10 can answer this question instantly? So, why is it so difficult? Most of us navigate our daily lives with relative ease. Drive your car, cook your food, use your computers, and talk on the phone like you were born to do it. But have you ever stopped to think about the things you don't know? And we're not just talking about what you did or didn't learn in the classroom. We're asking some college students the same question. We come to school and we learn history and math and science, but all too often we fail to learn how the world really works. Think about the things that we take for granted, the ubiquitous obvious things we use in our everyday lives, like cell phones. Or even a zipper. As simple as a zipper looks, do you actually understand how it works? Stop for a second. Why don't you take a minute to think about it? You likely use a zipper every single day, but how does a zipper actually work? How does this simple device interlock two sets of teeth that you otherwise can't connect by hand? Harder to explain than you thought? We'll explain it in just a bit. And it's okay if you don't understand it. You don't actually need to fully understand a zipper to prevent a wardrobe malfunction like my friend over here. The truth is, we don't know how much we don't know. So let's go back to this bus. Have you figured out yet which direction it would move if it started driving forward? The answer is to the left. But why? I told you before that most kids under the age of 10 could get this right. Don't take our word for it. Take theirs. Which way is this bus going?
That way.
Why do you think that this is the front?
Because the door is on the other side. This way. That way.
The door is on the other side of the bus, so the driver can let the passengers off at the curb. Kids know this better than anyone. But how do you know?
Because we're smart.
You are smart. Science writer Shankar Vedantam reports on the many processes that happen completely outside our conscious awareness.
So why is the bus question difficult for most adults and easy for children? Well, for one thing, it's a lot harder for an adult to see this simple drawing as a fully functioning bus. For a child, this is how a bus looks. But before you get too hung up on it, think about the bigger picture. This happens to us all the time in everyday life. We constantly come across problems we can't solve, and if we were honest with ourselves, we'd admit it. Psychologists have a term for this: the illusion of knowledge. Whether it's the bus question or how a zipper works, your brain is wired to try and provide an answer. It's a basic survival mechanism to make you feel more in control. After all, nobody likes to walk around feeling lost and clueless, especially about things we think we should know.
The best way to see just how your brain fills in the blanks for you is to challenge it to get detailed about how a specific object works. Take a bike, for example. I'm setting up this next experiment, created by psychologist Rebecca Lawson, to see if our college student can do this very simple test. So I have an assignment for you guys today. It's called Draw a Bike. You guys have all ridden bicycles before, right? You know what a bicycle looks like. It's got two wheels, etc. Yeah? You know what a bicycle looks like? All right, good. Sounds easy, right? Well, let's see how you would do. Stop. Pay attention. Take a look at these 4 drawings of bicycles. Only one of them could actually work, but it's up to you to decide which one it is. Have you made your choice? Remember your answer while we see how these students did. It turns out that over 90% of our participants drew totally unrealistic bicycles. How could it be so hard for smart people to draw a simple bike? So we've actually created these bikes here that reflect the most common mistakes that people make when they draw bicycles. You'll be happy to know that a lot of you guys match these perfectly. Let's see if you can spot which bike is actually functioning. The first one is this white bike over here. All right, so, Anne, tell me, here's your drawing. What's wrong with your drawing? What's wrong with this bike?
I have an extra bar there.
Which does what?
You can't steer the bike.
You can't steer the bike. So your prize is riding this mistake all the way down this campus. Okay, you don't have to do it anymore. Stop.
I was pretty confident that I'd be able to draw a bicycle, but clearly I didn't do so well.
Anne's bike looked like this. Option A. Is this the bike you picked? If so, you'd have a problem too. Moving on. Lauren, can you tell me what your mistake was?
Well, it looks like it's backwards.
Yes. Are you surprised that you sort of messed this up?
I'm really surprised because my brain went, I know how to throw a bike. I even added a bell on my picture.
Would you like to see her ride his bike?
No, it's totally not real. I was so confident in my bicycle, I didn't even realize that it was backwards.
Lauren's bike looked like this. Option B. If you pick this one, then you'd be out of luck. So now we're down to 2 bikes. Dalton's bike looked like option C. Did you pick that one? That's incorrect too. It doesn't even have a place for pedals. But if you picked option D, like Wesley's bike, then congratulations. You've been paying attention to your bicycle. You have got a perfect bike.
What? I'll tell you what did I do wrong.
Oh, yes!
Working!
Yes!
I'll see you guys later.
You know, our mental models of the world are not always as accurate as we think they are. But our brain doesn't like to feel unsure of itself, so it overcompensates. It makes you feel more confident than perhaps you should be in many instances. You see.
All right, we'll stop there. Thoughts, comments, you and those life for me. What do you think? Are there things that you think you know or think you know how they work and may in fact not be so? Yeah. Would your life change if your parents sat you down and said, you know, there's a deep, dark secret that we've been keeping from you, and it's time that we let you know you're adopted? Would that change anything for you, Phil?
Probably.
Probably. Yeah. Why? For me, it would explain everything. Because I'm like, I knew I wasn't one of you guys. I knew it. Yes. Right? But why would that change things? Your truth changing. What do you mean? Wait a minute. I thought truth was constant. I thought truth was the real thing. Right? But your truth would change. Everything that you thought you knew would now be different. But then what if they came back and said, oh, we're just joking. Then it's time to excommunicate yourself from people like that, right? So you know, like, get out of here. Right. So that's interesting. And I don't have time to talk about truth today, but that's an important thing to talk about as well. As we start working with young people and work with these so-called perceived differences, right? So the illusion of knowledge. So we've already talked about this idea of implicit bias, and that is basically implicit bias is that bias that we're not aware of. It's not in our consciousness. And so I have this this model here to really help us kind of think about this idea of implicit bias. And so here's the mental process of thinking, that our conscious mind takes in information. And what does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be conscious? To be aware. All right? To be aware. I would say awake and alive. Right? That's what it means to be conscious. And how does our conscious mind take in information? What 5 things does it use to take in information? Our 5 senses, right? So taste, smell, touch, sight, hearing. Did I get them all? Yes, I think so. Right? So it takes our 5 senses and it records those things. And then those things get stored into our subconscious. Sub means what? Under our conscious. So it gets stored in this place in our mind that is under our consciousness, which means it's still a part of our conscious. We still have access to it. It's just not as easy to have access to that, right? And this is where this idea of meaning gets created, all the things that are true and right and good are all stored there, right? So if you walk into your friend's home and you see that they have photos on the wall, and one of the photos is crooked. What does your mind say about that? It says fix it, please, because it is wrong. Now, is it wrong? It's hanging on a wall like all the other pictures. But the problem is cognitive dissonance. That thing causes cognitive dissonance because it should be like the other three pictures. And because it's not like the other two pictures, rather, because it's not like the other two pictures, it's the difference we would automatically say is wrong, when in fact there's no value associated with those three pictures. So technically it's not wrong, it's just not like the other one. But we add that extra value of whether it's right or wrong, good or bad. Okay? So our conscious takes all this information in, gets stored in our subconscious, and our creative subconscious is the actor on our conscious. And so the creative subconscious, its job is to alleviate or eliminate that cognitive dissonance, try to close the gap between those things. And so it tries to rectify whatever the outside stimulus is versus what the subconscious says that it should be. And so our creative subconscious tells us to go fix the picture. It shows us how to, it gives us strategies. So you could be talking to somebody at a party and, you see that picture needs to be fixed. And before you know it, you've maneuvered yourself to keep talking to these people at the party, and you just kind of lean up against the picture a little bit so that it gets straightened out, right? So it gives you all these creative ways to resolve the conflict that is in the subconscious, right? And so implicit bias is one of those ways that gets resolved. But we also know that implicit bias comes directly out of our context. And so it's a particular way to see the world, which means there are more than one way to see the world. Right? So implicit bias. I would say that the counterbalance to implicit bias is cognitive control. Cognitive control. Is there anyone that's afraid of spiders? Snakes? Zombie bites? I'm allergic to zombie bites. I'm just like, that's not cool, right? Or have you known? Or mice? That's a good one. Mice, right? Any mice? I don't like mice. And the thing that's creepy about mice isn't that they're small size, because I can get with the size, but it's how they move. Like it's a little scurrying movement. That's like, ugh. It's just, I don't know. It's just weird. Like, so if a mouse came into the classroom right now, so if you don't know, I do get paid by Bethel to teach this class, and so they expect me to have a certain amount of decorum, being able to keep it together in the classroom, no matter what happens in the classroom setting, right? They expect me to, keep it together. K-I-T. Keep it together. Anybody see that Wesley Snipes movie? Okay, anyway. But I will tell you, if a mouse came scurrying across the floor, I would have a very difficult time keeping my professional decorum. But I would have to, so I would have to engage in what? Cognitive control. So now what do I say to myself? I see the mouse in the class, and so I might get sophisticated and say, all right, class, right now might be a good time for a break. I think we're going to take a break or whatever. And then I might ask, I said, can I use that bowl just for a second? I'll be right back. Or I may say, let's all do an exercise where we just stand upon, I make it very creative because I'm in cognitive control, right? So I can't control that mouse, but I can control me. And so oftentimes we talk about implicit bias as being the boogeyman. And people say, well, I just can't control it. That's not an acceptable response. You are in control, but you have to be mindful, full of mind, not operating from your primal instincts, right? My primal instinct says what? Kill it! Get it out of here! Destroy it! Get it! but I'm a professional, so I have to act professionally. And apparently, this is how professionals like hold their hands. Professional. So implicit bias. So the illusion of knowledge is that we think we know more than we actually do. Implicit bias suggests there's a boogeyman that we can't control, but I would suggest that we have cognitive control, which means that we create routines so that those routines become a part of our habits, right? I was at a training and a woman said, she was a mother with young children, and she said, how do, like kids are like 2 and 3. And she was like, how do I talk to them about diversity? That's what she said. She asked me that. Guess what I said? Guess. Don't. Yeah, exactly, right? I said, don't talk to them about diversity. If you want them to know about diversity, or you want them to be encouraged to be diverse, show them diversity. Who do you have at the dinner table? What movies do you go to? What plays? What magazines are in your home? Are there diverse folks all throughout your stuff? One of the greatest tools, and I told you about my grandmother, loved her. She was an avid geographic magazine collector. She had magazines all over the place. I saw all sorts of stuff in these magazines that I would not, living in Dayton, Ohio, had access to. Particularly because there wasn't the internet at the time, right? So that was our version of the internet, and Reader's Digest. So she would read those stories from Reader's Digest, which now I appreciate the big print. So I appreciate the big print. So then there's this other thing and these things are all kind of related to this idea of a faulty kind of paradigm, a faulty way of seeing the world. And it really has to do with this idea of superiority, that we don't like feeling inferior, so we spend a lot of time trying to be superior, right? There's an old joke, and I don't know if the joke relates so much to you guys as much as it did when I was your age, kind of thing. But that there was always this adage that middle-aged men always want fast cars or Harley motorcycles or something like that. Do people talk like, is that the same kind? Okay, so it still applies. And there was also a joke that if you had to show off your wealth, or you had a fancy car or whatever, that you were actually just trying to show off because you had other things that you weren't, you didn't have prowess in, or you weren't good at doing, right? That you were overcompensating, right? So there's this concept called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and one way to think about this is if you can draw this chart for yourself. So on the bottom of the chart is about knowledge. So being a novice versus being an expert. So a novice would be at 1, and an expert would be at 5. We're asking this question: how good are you at a thing, right? So right along the bottom, 1 to 5, and then on the side, going up, this is the x-axis, right? Is that x or y? I forget. Y-axis. Okay. So on the y-axis, at the bottom, put novice, and then at the top, highly skilled, 1 to 5. And this y-axis is really about your confidence in your ability to do or be a certain particular thing, right? So, so how good are you at doing that? So we'll give 3 examples, and I want you to chart these examples for yourself. All right? So the first example is we use a bicycle, right? So put a star that denotes your how good you are, and the coordinate that matches how confident you are, or how skilled you are at riding a bike. So use a star to denote that. So for me, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I would say that I'm probably highly skilled. So that'll be a star there for me, right? Does this make sense? Okay, so on the scale of 1 to 5 here, 1 to 5 here. So here, how good are you? What is your knowledge? Are you an expert or are you a novice at riding a bicycle? So that's your knowledge. How confident are you in riding a bicycle from 1 to 5? Are you a novice or are you highly skilled at riding a bicycle in terms of what is your confidence in doing that? Is that a better, did I explain it thoroughly? Okay, cool. The next is neurosurgery. I want you to use a square to denote where you believe that you are in terms of neurosurgery. I would be like negative over here somewhere, right? I mean, like, don't ask me to do anything with neurosurgery. The next thing I'll ask you is being a college student. How would you assess your ability as a college student? And these examples should be pretty transparent, right? And what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, what symbol you want to use for that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Use a circle. Use a circle to symbolize that. Or whatever you chose. It doesn't matter. Whatever you chose for that. So what does this suggest? What does this charting on this mapping out suggest? What's that?
I'm not a neurosurgeon.
That you're certainly not a neurosurgeon. And I thank God for that, right? Because I'm not coming to you if my brain needs some work, right? What else? What else?
Loser college.
What else is this?
It puts in, I guess like learning, it puts in perspective that you can be confident in something, but not have much knowledge.
You could actually be confident in something and not have much knowledge in it. And sometimes people get those things confused and think that their confidence actually is the knowledge that they have. So you'll oftentimes have people who actually think they're smarter than they are. Right? What's the converse of that? Yeah. So you could actually know something and not feel confident in doing that. Right? So we call I'll just play this video. So we call that the
Located
There's
in
two
scenic
effects that
Decorah,
are happening.
Iowa, was founded in 1861 by a group of.
So we'll talk about both of those complexes in just a second.
Are you as good at things as you think you are? How good are you at managing money? What about reading people's emotions? How healthy are you compared to other people you know? Are you better than average at grammar? Knowing how competent we are and how our skills stack up against other people's is more than a self-esteem boost. It helps us figure out when we can forge ahead on our own decisions and instincts, and when we need instead to seek out advice. But psychological research suggests that we're not very good at evaluating ourselves accurately. In fact, we frequently overestimate our own abilities. Researchers have a name for this phenomenon, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This effect explains why more than 100 studies have shown that people display illusory superiority. We judge ourselves as better than others to a degree that violates the laws of math. When software engineers at two companies were asked to rate their performance, 32% of the engineers at one company and 42% at the other put themselves in the top 5%. In another study, 88% of American drivers describe themselves as having above average driving skills. These aren't isolated findings. On average, people tend to rate themselves better than most in disciplines ranging from health, leadership skills, ethics, and beyond. What's particularly interesting is that those with the least ability are often the most likely to overrate their skills to the greatest extent. People measurably poor at logical reasoning, grammar, financial knowledge, math, emotional intelligence, running medical lab tests, and chess all tend to rate their expertise almost as favorably as actual experts do. So who's most vulnerable to this delusion? Sadly, all of us, because we all have pockets of incompetence we don't recognize. But why? When psychologists Dunning and Kruger first described the effect in 1999, they argued that people lacking knowledge and skill in particular areas suffer a double curse. First, they make mistakes and reach poor decisions. But second, those same knowledge gaps also prevent them from catching their errors. In other words, poor performers lack the very expertise needed to recognize how badly they're doing. For example, when the researchers studied participants in a college debate tournament, the bottom 25% of teams in preliminary rounds lost nearly 4 out of every 5 matches. But they thought they were winning almost 60%. Without a strong grasp of the rules of debate, the students simply couldn't recognize when or how often their arguments broke down. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a question of ego blinding us to our weaknesses. People usually do admit their deficits once they can spot them. In one study, students who had initially done badly on a logic quiz and then took a mini course on logic were quite willing to label their original performances as awful. That may be why people with a moderate amount of experience or expertise often have less confidence in their abilities. They know enough to know that there's a lot they don't know. Meanwhile, experts tend to be aware of just how knowledgeable they are, but they often make a different mistake. They assume that everyone else is knowledgeable too. The result is that people, whether they're inept or highly skilled, are often caught in a bubble of inaccurate self-perception. When they're unskilled, they can't see their own faults. When they're exceptionally competent, they don't perceive how unusual their abilities are. So if the Dunning-Kruger effect is invisible to those experiencing it, what can you do to find out how good you actually are at various things? First, ask for feedback from other people, and consider it, even if it's hard to hear. Second, and more importantly, keep learning. The more knowledgeable we become, the less likely we are to have invisible holes in our competence. Perhaps it all boils down to that old proverb: when arguing with a fool, first make sure the other person isn't doing the same thing. Did you enjoy this lesson? If so, please consider supporting.
How is this different from the other conflicts?
I would say that it's not. I would say that, particularly when we talk about the Dunning and Kruger effect, it really is about this false superiority that people have, right? And the counterbalance to that is people are more confident in their abilities than they ought to be. There are also people who are competent but aren't confident in their ability, and that is typically referred to as the imposter syndrome, right? That somebody will find out that maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, or I'm questioning my stuff. Between the two of those folks, the folks who are the imposter are actually more they're more knowledgeable about their subject. They're just not as confident. But you have lots of people who are extremely confident but wrong. I mean, have you ever had arguments with those folks or had conversations and you're like, what is wrong with you? And they're like, no, that's just how it is. I know. I just know. Right. Cool. Other thoughts, comments? Is that helpful?
Yeah, like how is this different from hindsight bias as well?
So hindsight bias is a reactionary piece. So that is So hindsight bias might be enjoyment. When do you know that you enjoy something? So it feels good while it's happening, but when do you know that you enjoy that thing? After you've done it and you replay it and you say, I want to do it again because I enjoyed that, right? So hindsight bias is typically recognizing things after the initial engagement. Does that make sense? Yes.
But then how's it different from rosy retrospection?
Yep. So what I would submit with rosy retrospection is that comes with a predisposition on interpreting a past event from the backside, right? So I'm already looking for. It would be the same as having a positive schema. So the whole rosy outlook is that I've already predetermined what the end is going to be, even though it hasn't happened. It's the same. I would say it's very similar to an implicit bias. It would be a form of implicit bias on a positive aspect, right? Looking for the positive pieces. Other folks. This is stuff I love. I love this stuff because it's made me a better teacher, particularly in K-12 settings, right? So another way to even look at, well, we'll talk about that in just a second. So there's Dunning-Kruger effect, and then there's the imposter syndrome. And I would suggest that there are politicians, there are athletes, there are lots of people who have confidence, but not based on any fruit. So how do you know? And I just gave that away too. So a couple of things. One thing I know about people who strive for superiority. Strive for superiority. What have you noticed about those people? And why are we connecting that to the Dunning-Kruger effect?
They're overconfident in something.
So they're overconfident in something. So when you say overconfident, yes.
They're more confident than correct.
They're more confident than correct. But why are they boasting about their confidence?
Because they have a big ego.
Because they have a big ego? I would even say ego falls even further down in this conversation. Why are they boasting about their skill, their ability, or what they have? Why are they seeking superiority? Because they lack in something. Go ahead.
They want to be the best.
Because they want to be the best, because they are overcompensating for what? Something that they're lacking, right? So what's the counterbalance to superiority? Inferiority. So people trying to say how great they are, demonstrate how great they are overcompensating for inferiority. Are we inferior as a species of beings? Are we inferior? It's a big question, isn't it? There's lots of ways to think about that. Let's look at a couple of ways. Man versus a single man versus a single bear. Bear. Right? Tiger versus man. Tiger. Storm at sea versus man. Let's find one more. Earthquake versus man.
Man.
Right? No, we're inferior. Right? In the sense that they control. Our arms are only so long and so big, and our hands are only so big, right? So the things that we can control are relatively small compared to the universe at large, right? So that makes me feel inferior. Now, when I ask what inferior, many of you, I saw it on your face, you're like, no, I'm not inferior. Why is that? Why? And I suggest that's healthy, right? Why is it healthy